For 10 days, 600 American soldiers have been trapped on this ridge, surrounded on every side by a Japanese division that outnumbers them. Their water source was captured on day 3. Their dead lie unburied because there's nowhere safe to dig. Every morning brings another assault, and every assault brings them closer to being wiped out completely. At the center of the American line, one sergeant stands up out of his foxhole. He is exposed, unarmed except for the sound of his own voice, and he starts shouting in perfect Japanese. The attacking soldiers hear the order. They recognize the dialect. It sounds exactly like one of their own officers. They charge forward, directly into a killing field the Americans had spent all night preparing. 54 Japanese soldiers die in the next few minutes. Not one American does. The man who gave that order wasn't Japanese. He was an American staff sergeant named Roy Matsumoto, and 2 years earlier, the United States government had locked his family in a prison camp for the crime of looking like the enemy. Roy Hiroshi Matsumoto was born in 1913 on a small farm outside Los Angeles, the son of Japanese immigrants. At 8 years old, following a common practice among Japanese-American families at the time, he was sent to Japan to live with his grandparents and receive a Japanese education. He stayed for 9 years. He came back to California at 17, graduated from Long Beach Polytechnic High School in 1933, and took a job delivering groceries for a Japanese import company. It was a small, unremarkable job, but it left him with something almost no one else in the U.S. military would have: fluency in half a dozen regional Japanese dialects, learned door to door, family by family. On his delivery route, he had no way of knowing that skill would one day save 600 lives. Then came December 7, 1941. Within months, under Executive Order 9066, the U.S. government ordered the forced removal of over 110,000 people of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast, most of them American citizens. Roy Matsumoto was one of them. He was first sent to the Santa Anita Assembly Center, a horse race track in Arcadia, California, hastily converted into a detention camp. Families were housed in the horse stalls. Then he was moved again to the Jerome Relocation Center, a camp built in the swampland of southeast Arkansas, surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards. This is where Roy Matsumoto was living. An American citizen, imprisoned without trial by his own government when he volunteered for the United States Army. He was accepted into the Military Intelligence Service Language School at Camp Savage, Minnesota, and graduated at the top of his class. After infantry training at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, the Army needed volunteers for a new, secretive long-range unit that would operate deep behind Japanese lines in the jungles of Burma. Out of 200 Nisei linguists who could have been picked, only 14 were selected. Roy Matsumoto was one of them. The unit would become known to history as Merrill's Marauders, 5307th Composite Unit, provisional, codename Galahad. Nearly 3,000 men. No tanks, no artillery, resupplied only by airdrop. Ordered to march over 1,000 miles through some of the most brutal terrain on Earth, and fight. The Japanese Army's battle-hardened 18th Division, the same division that had driven the British out of Singapore. Matsumoto weighed about 125 pounds. He carried more than half his body weight in gear through the jungle. His job had nothing to do with carrying a rifle into a firefight. His job was to listen, to read intercepted messages, to interrogate prisoners, and, when necessary, to crawl alone, at night, past his own army's lines and into range of the enemy. IMG, Nhpum, Burma terrain. His first real test came in March 1944, near Nhpum. Matsumoto tapped into a Japanese field telephone line and intercepted a message from a Japanese sergeant. Worried aloud to his commander that only 3 men were guarding an ammunition dump. That single overheard sentence gave away the dump's location. American forces destroyed it before it could be used. It was the Marauders' first engagement of the campaign, and Matsumoto's intelligence work had already changed its outcome. But Nhpum was only the beginning. By early April, the Marauders' 2nd Battalion had dug in on a jungle ridge called Nhpum Ga. The Japanese 18th Division surrounded them completely. For the next 10 days, there was no way in and no way out except by air. Resupply planes dropped ammunition and rations, but the drop zone kept falling under Japanese fire. The waterhole changed hands more than once. Mortar and small arms fire came in almost constantly. There was no ground stable enough and no safety long enough to bury the dead. On one of those nights, something was happening on the edge of the perimeter that no one in the American line could make sense of. Too much noise, too many voices, layered on top of each other in the dark. Matsumoto's battalion commander, Colonel George McGee, sent him to find out what it was. Matsumoto took off his jacket, his pistol belt, and his rifle, and left them behind. Then he crawled out past the American line, alone, carrying only a couple of grenades, toward the sound of the enemy. What he found was a staging position, Japanese soldiers massing for a dawn assault. He memorized what he could and crawled back before sunrise. The Marauders spent the rest of the night quietly pulling their line back and rigging the abandoned foxholes with booby traps, turning their own position into a trap for whoever moved into it next. At first light, the Japanese assault came exactly where Matsumoto said it would. The lead platoon walked straight into the booby-trapped foxholes and stalled under fire. That should have been the end of it. Instead, a second wave of Japanese soldiers was still forming up behind them, ready to press the attack. This is the moment Matsumoto stood up. He had grown up delivering groceries to Japanese immigrant families from a specific region of Japan, the same region his own parents were from, Hiroshima. That gave him fluency in the local Hiroshima dialect, the exact dialect spoken by many of the soldiers of the 18th Division attacking him that morning. In that dialect, sounding for all the world like one of their own officers, Matsumoto shouted a single word: "Charge!" The soldiers obeyed. They rose out of cover and rushed forward, straight into the booby-trapped ground and the waiting American guns. When the smoke cleared and the Marauders counted the field the next morning, 54 Japanese soldiers were dead, including 2 officers. The Americans hadn't lost a single man in the engagement. By his own account afterward, Matsumoto believed his intelligence work, and that single shouted order had saved the battalion roughly 600 men, not once, but twice. Once at Nhpum, and again at Nhpum Ga. The siege at Nhpum Ga would go down as one of the fiercest actions the Marauders fought in Burma, and one of the only conventional dig-in defensive battles the unit, built for hit-and-run raids, was never equipped for. When it was finally broken, the survivors pushed on toward their ultimate objective, the airfield at Myitkyina. For his actions in Burma, Roy Matsumoto was awarded the Legion of Merit. When one of his fellow soldiers later asked why a man who had saved an entire battalion twice wasn't put up for the Medal of Honor, his commanding officer, Colonel McGee, gave a simple answer: he was only an enlisted man doing his duty. Matsumoto didn't stop there. When the Marauders were disbanded in August 1944, he transferred to the 475th Infantry Regiment and the Mars Task Force, operating alongside Chinese nationalist guerrillas near the border of French Indochina. Demolitions, prisoner capture, more intelligence work behind enemy lines. In August 1945, while he was stationed in China, Matsumoto heard the news that an atomic bomb had leveled the city of Hiroshima. His parents were from Hiroshima. Some of his family still lived there. For weeks, he had no way of knowing whether they were alive. It wasn't until after the war ended that he finally learned his parents had survived. Their home, according to the documentary later made about his life, did not. After the war, Matsumoto stayed in the army. He escorted war crimes suspects to Japan for trial, then was posted to occupied Tokyo for undercover intelligence work he would never discuss in detail for the rest of his life. It was there that he met his future wife, Kimiko. He served 20 years in total, retiring as a master sergeant in 1963. And then, for decades, he said almost nothing about any of it. His own daughter, Karen, didn't learn what her father had done in the war until she was in college. When a classmate showed her a magazine article with his photo in it, her reaction, recorded years later, was simple. He never said anything. She never knew any of this. The recognition came late, but it came. In 1993, Roy Matsumoto was inducted into the U.S. Army Ranger Hall of Fame at Fort Benning, Georgia, the first Japanese American to receive that honor. A year later, the Secretary of the Army named him a distinguished member of the 75th Ranger Regiment, the modern unit that traces its lineage directly back to the Marauders. In 1997 came induction into the Military Intelligence Corps Hall of Fame. In 2011, at nearly 100 years old, Matsumoto traveled to Washington, D.C. to receive the Congressional Gold Medal, the United States' highest civilian honor, awarded collectively to the Japanese-American soldiers of the 100th Infantry Battalion, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and the Military Intelligence Service. Roy Hiroshi Matsumoto died on April 21, 2014, at his home on San Juan Island, Washington, surrounded by his family. He was 100 years old, 11 days short of his next birthday. The country that imprisoned his family without trial asked him to risk his life using the one skill his upbringing in Japan had given him. He said yes, twice, by his own account. That decision saved the lives of 600 men he served beside. Men who, for the rest of their lives, said plainly that they owed their survival to him. He carried that story for almost 40 years without telling his own daughter. If this is the first time you've heard the name Roy Matsumoto, you're not alone, and that's exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe for more true stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and better documented than they've ever been told before.